All right, so now recording. Okay, so this is the test map that we were working on before, but what we're going to do is create a new map. So anyways, going back to the actual directory thing. So what you want to do is create your directory. If you can see, here's your directory structure: Crisis 4s, mods, MWLL, game, levels, multiplayer, TC. And then in there, you would create a new directory and call it TC, whatever you wish. I'll just call it TC tutorial in this case. And as you can see, it's empty directory. Great. So in the actual map editor, let's close this. We'll just create a new one. And we'll call it TC, same word, same name, TC underscore tutorial. And we're going to set it to, for 2048 by 2048. So we're going to make a smaller map. Like I mentioned to Draith, a map that size is something like Kandahar or Kandahar. A map that's larger, that's 496 by 496, would be something like Death Valley, which is considerably larger. So this basically has 4 kilometer square, 4 kilometer size, and Death Valley would be 8 kilometers in one direction. And then you click on OK. Obviously not. And away we go. So now, before we do anything, we're going to actually go ahead and save this map. But we're going to not click on simply save, but we're going to actually click on save as. And we're going to put it into the correct directory. So this is the incorrect directory that it created outside of the mods directory. So we're going to have to go and click on the Crisis 4s directory, go to mods, MWLL, game, levels, multiplayer, TC, and find our tutorial, and obviously the one that you would use, and whatever you named it, and call it TC underscore tutorial, and then save. So now it's actually created it, and that avoids the whole step of actually having to move the file and such. And as we see, we are looking around in a blank map. Now to move around in the actual map editor, right-click, holding down right-click, and using the WASD moves you around the map, up, down. Basically, it's exactly the same movement in the actual game. So as you can see, we're a blank slate. There's nothing here. So often, what you can do is create a new terrain. And in this case, we would simply click on terrain and go to edit terrain. And that brings up a window. I don't know if you see the window coming up, but let's see if I attach it to the side here. There we go. Can you see that window, guys?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right, so when we can click on tools and then you go to generate terrain. This will create a randomized terrain, and frankly, it usually makes it very, very bumpy, so not necessarily the best for MWLL. So I like bringing the feature size down to very low. Bump also low. Keep the detail up. Variation, sure. Sharpness, and the step. Well, actually, you can bring that down to 1. Let's see what happens. You can always regenerate this as many times as possible. But each time you do, it erases your terrain and basically restarts it from scratch. Then you click on OK. And where's my map? Or did it actually create it and it was actually so flat? That's a possibility. This could be all just flat now. 1 sec. Just moving around just to make sure. All right, let's just double check again. Generate terrain, and we'll make it just a little bit bumpier and see what happens. Zoinks, there we go. And that's quite a bumpy terrain. So imagine having a tank trying to navigate through this terrain. Good luck. So this is way too bumpy for our use. So let's see if we bring it down to, let's see, 1.5 or so. And bring this down to 0.2 and this down to there. Let's see what that creates. Oh, that's also bumpy. Well, that's not very helpful.
I'm not sure what I did wrong, but mine loaded in with water.
Yes, it does actually load within the water. It also depends on where your viewpoint is. So if you go further up, you will go actually out of the ocean. But yeah, they always come with pre-generated with an ocean. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just you just have to change your viewpoint, and then you can also set your ocean height later on. This is something we can do because not all maps have oceans, or you don't have oceans. You can actually remove the water, as you can see right here, and you can set the water level here, basically, and that controls your ocean level. And that's just for generic ocean. I mean, it has nothing to do with any type of other water bodies or rivers. So that's just for the ocean. So let's try it again. Try to make it as not as flat as possible, but almost as flat as possible. And let's see, something like that. Oh, it's still bumpy. You can see how often I use this actual part. Let's see what happens if I do it this way. Oh, that's no bumps. There. Anyways, play around with it, and you can just pretty much edit your terrain after. So it's nothing bad per se. You can just futz around with it and until you're happy with the output. Anyway, so that's your terrain. And if we want to go ahead and start smoothing things, we can use the smooth and see what happens. And this does a generic smooth for everything. And this will smooth the slopes. As you can see, it's getting smoother and smoother. And you can do these commands over and over again. And you can smooth. Oh, interesting. Sure. And there we go. It's considerably smoother now, and you can just have just small areas. It's almost like an island setup. Anyways, these commands are for the entire map. It's not just in one place. So if you want to actually edit parts of the map, we can use the actual terrain brush, and this will do the same thing. But this kind of gets in the way, so I prefer doing it by closing this part and going up to the roll-up bar. And the roll-up bar is the main area that controls all the functions in the actual editor. Under this section right here, the terrain section, and the modified part is often used, and this gives you the option to actually change your terrain. So here you go, and you can actually flatten things, so you can set your radius to, let's say, 100 meters, and the inside radius to 77, and there you go. And if you want to change the height of something, well, you set the height to whatever you want, and you can see that the yellow bar is going to be, the yellow circuit's going to say this is how high it's going to be. So if we left click on it, you can start seeing the terrain starting to smooth out in this, to this height. And the outer circle, the outer circle will obviously be a little bit smoother, but as you can see, it's quite rough. And if you want to make something smooth, well, then you can switch over to the smooth tool. And here you can change the radius and the hardness. The harder it is, obviously, the more aggressive the smoothness is. And you can actually then smooth things out by left clicking and holding.
So if you made that inner circle super tiny and the outer circle super large, it's going to be much more smooth, right?
Exactly. And let's say, well, you can actually go ahead and change that, for example. If we go like this, and we just do a higher height, and we'll do another one right here. And if we just do it like this, you can see that it makes it almost like a round, smooth mountain that you can change and edit and such. So yeah, there's different ways to actually modify and edit the terrain. But as you can see, one thing that's missing is a texture. And one important part is to actually texture it. So what we can do is actually apply the default texture that's already loaded in the game, which is basically grass. And to do that, we would go to the File menu, and we click Generate Surface Texture. And we click on that, and it sets the texture dimensions. Typically keep it at 4096 by 4096. That's more than sufficient for most cases. These options you want to keep off for now, and you can only use the higher quality and calculate terrain sky accessibility only in your final output. That just creates a higher quality ambient occlusion map on the actual final output, but at this point we don't need that. Click on OK. It takes a little bit of time, and there we go. Now everything is textured with a very basic green texture. And obviously it's not very detailed, but that's okay. This is something else we can actually change. So if we click on terrain and we go to texture, that loads up the texture section. Now the texture, the windows that load up might load in different locations on your system. So what you can actually do is click on their title bars and then move them accordingly and attach them to the left, attach them to the right, or simply keep them free floating and resize them accordingly. Whatever is easier for you. And then you can always close them, and if you ever want to get them back, you can go to the View section, or just simply go back to the texture and terrain and such. So if we want to actually change the actual texture type or the look of it, we can actually select and change the detail scale. The higher the detail scale, the more detailed it is. At lower, the larger the features are going to be. And if you put 0.5, instantly, if you look now at the texture, if you look closer into it, the grass texture or the grass effects are a little bit larger. Go back to the texture, you can change it to 2, and it'll be much smaller. Typically, anywhere between 0 to 1 is typically used. And yeah, I mean, this is to your, you can change it to your heart's desire. So if you want to add another texture, we would actually add another layer. And this would be the layer that we click on by clicking on Add Layer. And then we can choose a different type of material, even though it is already different slightly, as you can see. This one's plain grass green, so it'll look slightly different compared to the other one. But let's try to use something completely different. You click on the actual material, and that brings up the material editor, which also might show up in a different location. You can just resize it just like the other window. And we can select something that's, well, let's see, how about Cliff Basalt 3D? Sure. If you select this and you keep it selected, and you go back to the layer tasks over here, and you click on Assign Material, it'll assign it to this section right here. So this layer is now a cliff layer, so we'll rename it as Cliff. And now if we actually move this over and attach it to the side here, it doesn't give us very much room to look around, but we can actually now go ahead and paint the layer. So how we do that? We would go to the roll-up bar, and the roll-up bar is basically the main interface where you can choose from the different sections of the actual editor. Sometimes you don't see it straight away. You can simply click on Show Roll-Up Bar here if you don't see it, and select the actual thing that you're looking for. And in this case, we're looking for the Layer Painter. Layer Painter is exactly what it sounds like. It actually can paint a layer. And for example, since we've selected a cliff, we want to have the cliff only on something that's relatively angled. So let's say 50 degrees to 90 degrees. You enter slope from 50 to 90, and that means it'll only apply the texture from if the slope is that angle. And sure enough, if we click on it, well, there's your not very pretty texture. That's pretty terrible, actually. If you look at it, it's very, very detailed and it's very patterny. So how do we fix that? We go back to the detail scale for the actual texture and reduce it to, let's say, 0.2. That's starting to look a bit better, but that's still a little bit too small. So let's put it 0.1. Even though it does have a repeating pattern, it's starting to look a little bit better, right? And actually, let's put it down to like 30 degrees to 90 degrees. So anything that's kind of heavily sloped. And if you left click, obviously, is how you apply it. It'll apply that texture to anything that has that angle. So pretty straightforward. All good, guys? Cool. The hardness also is a setting where it allows the previous color to bleed through. So if you set the hardness of very little, it'll apply the texture, but it'll allow the previous color that was here to basically leak through. Whatever, you can play with it and such, and then you can actually mask by layers. And also actually, this is an interesting little tool. If you want to make it brighter, you bring it up like this, and this just does a very quick adjustment to the actual brightness to it. Another cool thing is that if you go back to the actual terrain texture layers, and whenever you're actually in a tool, if you want to get out of the tool, you always hit Escape. Anyway, so if you want to get back into the terrain texture and you're like, I'm not happy with that the texture, we can actually click on the material again, bring up the material editor, and then select something completely different, like, I don't know, cliff, flat, brown, gray. And if we select it, and make sure that it's selected over here in the material editor and click on Assign Material, zoinks, it's just switched all of the stuff that we've already pointed to the other one, which, as you can see, looks pretty terrible in this case. So let's try another one. Cliff Coral, Assign. Well, it's a little bit better. Still a little bit huge, which means we have to resize the detail scale to, let's say, 0.5. Oh, all right, it's starting to look a little bit, more interesting. Not very pretty, but you kind of get the idea. And so that's how that works. Terrain control. The basics of terrain control is how to create a map that has a decent flow. So in other words, where there's some good line of sight, some broken line of sight, some pathing that you expect people to go, or you try to recommend people to go to, or you just simply set it up all open and then hope for the best and see what they'll come up with. But normally what people will do is make beeline to the objective. And if you have a single capture point, well, it's going to be in pretty much somewhere in the middle of the map. If you have multiple capture points, then it becomes obviously more interesting. And if you have terrain features like a mountain or, something like Ring of Fire, you have very distinct pathing areas of where you can get through if you don't have jump jets and such. So you have to kind of take that all into consideration when you design a map and how you actually envision on how it's going to play out. Um, yeah, I mean, it's incredibly open-ended. You can do pretty much whatever you want, but you can end up with something that just doesn't flow very well because of strange terrain features or have choke points that shouldn't be there, or people can snipe into areas very easily. All those things have to be kind of thought about before you start putting down assets and such, because the number of times I've created a huge change on a map and say, okay, this looks cool, and then find out that it's completely open in a certain angle where people can just shoot into the spawn area and there's no protection. So then you have to kind of work around that, and you spend a lot of time rearranging things that you've already put down and tweaking a map, even from a new one. That's going to take up the majority of your time, because you're going to be like saying, okay, this looks nice, and then you're going to realize, oh, well, this doesn't play well, so I have to start moving things around. So all the stuff that you've already put down, all the objects, have to be moved around, either individually or hopefully together. And that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work, and then you have to edit terrain to make sure that things line up properly. It can get kind of convoluted up. The roll-up bar again, let's attach it to the side. There we go. Oh yeah, just one more thing I forgot to mention. Save the game often and change your save names. So in other words, I have TC tutorial. I'm going to go to save as. We'll call it TC tutorial-1A. Because unfortunately, it can crash. The editor is sensitive, especially when you are modifying terrain and using the layer painter and also the voxel painter. We'll talk about voxels another time, but voxels are pretty much anything that you can create caves with, or something that has a ceiling through terrain, which is like, if you look at TCL version 2, that whole cave thing that I set up there for the VTOL base, that whole entire thing is made out of voxels. It's actually not a terrain layer. Voxels are a pain to work with. They're much more limited than actually just working with terrain, but it allows you to actually create things like caves and such. Saving often, and then also then saving by incrementing. I mean, I have hundreds and hundreds of versions of my maps, just because if you actually save something and you export the map, exporting the map is making it ready for being played. And if something goes wrong, then at least you can fall back. Oh, that's right. Ouch mentioned that you should reduce the number of undos. This is found under the Tools section and under Preferences. In all honesty, I keep it at 50. I like having lots of undo levels. But yes, it can be a source of crashing because it requires more memory to keep all the previous changes. So you can basically go undo 50 times. In case you don't like a whole bunch of changes you just recently made, you just go undo, and then away you go. If you're more memory limited, then yes, bringing that down to like 10 or 20 will save some memory.
I'm assuming that when you close the editor and start it back up, it
does save this. It does save it. Saves this. Oh, you mean to reduce memory usage? Yes, absolutely.
You basically get 50 new undo levels. Right?
Okay. Yes, I will put it. Sorry about that. Let me just put a reminder for me. Sorry about that.
So yeah, my question was when you close the editor,
Mhm.
let's say you've already reached your 50 undo levels, close it, start it back up, you get 50 new undo levels because it like emptied that memory, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, everything that you do in the editor is pretty much undoable. So let's say if you paint something you don't like, you just Control Z or just click on the undo button there. So I mean, the more undo levels you have, the more memory it will take up, and it'll take them up relatively quickly. I mean, if you have like 8 gigs of memory and you don't have anything else running, you'll be fine. You can run at 50, I find, without any issues. And I've run the editor on a 4 gig machine. Okay, yes, it's a little bit more clunky. It's slower and such, and it does crash a little bit more, but if you have 8 gigs of memory, then I think you'll be fine with 50. But if you do see a bunch of crashing, like you mentioned you had a few, bring it down to 20 or so and see what happens. So yeah, next thing. If you want to actually export your map, then that means make it ready for being playable, or to basically, being playable. You would click on File and then Export to Engine. And that does it relatively quickly. And now it's actually created the level.pack file, and that actually contains all the necessary information for it to be loaded into Crysis. Again, any type of changes that you make to the terrain, you always want to, after you're done with making the changes, you always want to generate the surface texture again. And that'll bake the texture that into the actual output, and it'll be saved across map saves. Or actually, no, it saves it in a separate section, so technically you don't actually have to save. It does it in a section. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Just do those two often, and you'll be good to go. What else is there? Oh yes, in the environment section right here under the terrain, you can change the detail layers of view distance for your view distance ratio for your detail layers. So if we set that to, I think the default is 1, you're going to see that as I pull away from the area, the detail texture for the cliff goes away relatively quickly. But if we bring it up to 5, it stays much, much longer. And of course, everything else that has a detailed texture shows that texture. Of course, that uses more memory up, and your frames can actually go down a little bit, but at this point, when you have a relatively sparse map, it doesn't make much of a difference, and that can be changed at any time. Another thing is view distance. That's how far the actual view distance goes. So let's say if you bring it down to 2,000, well, you can see that you can't see much further past 2 kilometers. Usually anywhere between 4,000 to 8,000 is fine. 6,000 usually is fine. Low spec means when I think people are actually running in low. If I'm not mistaken, that should be closer to the number than let's say 3,000, 4,000 if it's 6,000.
Does this affect the in-game view distance?
Yes. Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't affect the in-game view distance. It affects what the map will render. So in other words, if you have objects beyond that, will they render? That's a good question. If you set it to something very, very low and then you have objects beyond that, I don't know if it'll actually render the objects or not. But in any case, it has a big effect to the viewability of the actual map. So if you actually keep on zooming out, as you can see, I can keep on zooming out, and then finally at 6,000 meters away, that starts to cut away. And for a map that's 4 kilometers on one edge, obviously 6,000 is more than enough. But if you have a larger map, then sometimes a larger number is better. Of course, as you add stuff to your map, and if you have a lot of things to it, then unfortunately you might want to bring that down. Like Wildlands Assault is down to 5,000, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, or 5,500. I forgot what Death Valley is. But anyways, they're around anywhere between 5,000 to 6,000 for the bigger maps.
I was wondering if it was that because it happened to me with the map I was messing around with today.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that one of the Solaris Arena maps also has that same issue where usually you should be able to see all the way across the map because those are actually small maps.
Yes.
But I can't remember which one it is, but you can't see all the way across it.
Yeah.
The objects just disappear. And
if the objects disappear, then yeah, I would assume that I guess this does take precedence for objects too.
Okay.
So yeah, and then I guess that would be relatively low. And
nice.
for
Good to know.
for performance reasons, who knows why it was done like that, but yeah. Anyways, can always be changed. What else is there? Actually, you know what? Why don't we just continue with the terrain features and such. A nice thing about Living Legends is the time of day. And the time of day system, I'll bring up the actual thing here. It's under terrain and then time of day. That gives you the control over what you see and the sun position and such. And let's see. Right now we're at noon. Always click on Force Sky Update. I had more luck of things actually being able to save properly. And as you can see, we have the sun going up and down accordingly. And now it's over here. And you can pretty much change the look of the actual map quite a bit. And if you bring it further down, it'll start casting shadows depending on your actual game settings for your actual game. But in general, you can change the way the map looks quite a bit. And then of course you can change how bright it is. And if you double click on one section right here, you can increase the brightness considerably. And that sun color multiplier simply is the direct light that is emanating from the actual sun. So it's directional. And as you can see, it makes a hard shadow. Specular multiplier is obviously how reflective things are. And let's see, one other one is sky multiplier. And those are the main ones. So if you double click on it, it creates a point, and you can change on how dark or not dark the shadowy parts of your map is. And as you can see, the lower you bring it, the less light there is in the shadow part. And that'll affect pretty much anything that's in that area, including objects and such. So you can really change the way that the map looks. If you want to have a high contrasty map, or if you want to have something that's very not contrasty, you can easily change this. And then you can make multiple points. And each time you want to change a point on the hour here, you just double click and add it and change it accordingly. If you want to change the color, you also can change the ambient color. In this case, it's kind of a bluish, but let's say if you want to have more of a reddish color, well, there you go. Now you have a reddish hue, and that's for the ambient color. So you can see there's a bit of an ambient red color.
Change it back. I feel like I'm on acid cough.
That is true. And you can actually really boost it up. Zoinks. And now everything's going to get red. Even the sun. It's not that intense. Let me just make it a little bit more intense. There we go. Acid cough. Or phlegeton.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you can change
it's not
it.
too bad on that setting.
Yeah, actually, it's kind of Yeah, it's warm. And then you can change it as the time changes. So if you want to create a dawn time and such, you can change the necessary time during the night and such. And as you can see, it's much too bright during the night because you haven't set up the proper nighttime brightness levels. So, for example, bring down the brightness level so it's nice and dark during the evening and during the morning. Let's see, like that. And then we actually go through the sky color multiplier, which is the shaded areas. There we go. And suddenly now we have a dark time during the night. And now we have a dark time. Now we don't have a moon yet because we haven't actually set the texture for the moon. So as you can see, if you go through the different times, it's nice and dark at night. Well, it actually comes up a little bit in the day. Here's the day. It's coming, getting darker as you go through the time, and has a nice little effect there. And all these effects can actually be changed in the actual time of day section. It gets very, very detailed. I mean, you can do some really beautiful stuff. Like Ancient Demise really worked on some spectacular effects in TC2 and I've used a lot of his ideas on some of the maps that I've worked on, and it really looks quite striking. And there we go, at night. Here we are. Anyways, that's that in the prefabs. Now, what is a prefab? Prefab is a collection of objects, brushes, entities, basically a whole bunch of stuff, areas that have been basically prefabricated and are ready to go. Prefabs in MWLL are quite useful because they take the complexity out of creating something that spawns properly, spawns in the right location, and creating the elevators, creating the opening doors and such. All that stuff is taken care of the prefab. And typically prefabs you don't want to edit. And if you do, well, I mean, you can futz around with them, you can take them apart, but if you significantly edit the actual parts in them, you could actually break their spawning capabilities or making things spawn properly. So to find prefabs, they're in the roll-up bar under Objects and under Prefabs. Now, as you can see, nothing there. Why? Because we actually have to load the actual prefab into the level. And to do that, we actually have to go to the Tools directory, View, Open View Plane, and you go to Database View. If you don't see that already down by one of your windows, it might be there, it might not be there, but you go there. You go to the prefab library, and you click on Load. And you have the prefabs, and the most important ones are the MWLL assets. Click on Open. And sometimes I find, like I mentioned before, to Draith, the destructibles are also okay to use. Buildings, well, they're not that important, but, well, load them anyways. It just says basically that they're accessible. Hey there, that's you there, Cap. Alright, so once they're actually loaded in, that means we actually have them accessible in here. So if we click somewhere else, we click on Brush, and then we go back to Prefab, there we go. So the MWL assets. Now, a lot of them are a little bit jumbled. But after a while, eventually Draith and I found the correct one, which was the MechHanger, which is for the inner sphere, and MechHanger CL. There's a whole bunch of mech hangers in here if you look through them, and you could easily get lost in selecting the wrong one. In any case, this is the most basic one. It's preset for Innersphere, for the Innersphere team, and this one's preset for the clan team. So you click on it, and then you would actually simply click and drag it. And as you can see, if you look at the section right here, it shows you the actual positioning of the object. And right now it says -1 kilometer basically down. So obviously that's incorrect, but as you can see, if I bring it up, it's out in the distance. Why is that happening? Because if you look over here, if I'm on locked on the z-axis, if I would actually click on lock on X and Y plane, well, suddenly it's much closer, and that locks it in the X and Y plane. So once you click on it, left click on it again, it positions it, and there you have your actual base. You can actually make things follow terrain. How do we do that again? I forgot how to do that. But in any case, click on follow terrain, and then it will actually follow the terrain location. As you can see, it goes up and down. It can be useful. Sometimes doesn't line up properly, but in this case, it actually kind of does. So, just to make it simple, we're going to move this over here, to this corner of the map, and keep it rotated. You know what? Actually, we'll just keep it rotated at 0. Another thing that I find makes things easier to place them is if you keep things rotated at 90-degree angles. So in other words, you have the snap to angle, so that changes it from every 5 degrees. If you disable this, it does it every degree. There's no limit to it. If you want to go back, use your undo. I typically keep it on for most cases. Same thing with snap to grid, so it moves it in certain areas. Oh, sorry. You have 3 functions that are hotkeyed to 1, 2, and 3. 1 is move, which allows you to move things in the X, Y, and Z plane. Typically you have X, Y selected, but obviously if you select Z, if you click on the actual arrow right here, it moves it in the Z plane as well. 2 is rotate, so again rotate in the Z plane, rotate this way. As you can see, you can rotate it in various ways. Upside down, you name it. And if you screw up, just Control Z, brings it back to what it was before. Try to keep things at 0 or 90, 180. It just makes things easier to align initially. You can always do the tweaking later, or if you want to make things, at 45-degree angles, okay, that works as well. But it makes it a little bit more difficult to align other things to these objects. Because if you have another object and you want to align it, well, then you're moving it on a 45-degree angle, which is not just one axis, you're moving it on two axes. So it can be a little bit more difficult to line things up. So that's why I prefer keeping everything on 0. You could always change it later. Anyways. So yeah. You want to line up your mech hanger so that it's not too high and not too low. So like you want to keep it at a certain height. I think this looks right. The red part that you see right here, what that is this is a proxy solid. What a solid is an object that you can actually create in the actual editor, and you can shape it in rudimentary ways. So you can make squares, rectangles, triangles, and you can actually make more complicated parts to it, but nothing that actually has holes in it and such. You can stack them on top of each other, and I'll show you how to do all that stuff later. It allows you a definite customization of if you don't have the asset or the actual object that you're looking for, and you want to create something that's a simple ramp or something else like that, well, you can use a solid for that. And in this case, this solid here, the one that's cross-hatched, is a proxy solid. So that means people can walk over it, but it actually, in-game, it'll be transparent, so you won't actually see it. So if you remember any of the stuff that, let's say, places that BAs can hide and such, you can block them via these transparent solids so that the BAs can't get through cracks in an object and such. You can look through it and such, but you can't actually pass through it. So that's what a solid does. And you can walk on solids depending on how you set them up, but in general they are, you can physically, you don't clip through them basically. In this prefab that we have here, the main MechWarrior prefab and the MechWarrior CL prefab, we have a whole bunch of areas, orange areas. We have some decals, which are these little dudes right here. And we have, let's see if I can actually properly move into it, these areas here, this blue area. These are areas that are the vehicle triggers. These are the things that actually say, okay, this is where the, if you shut down, for example, in that area, that's where the repair area is going to commence, if your mech is in this area. This overall area in here is all a buy area, so anything that you're walking around here, you can actually have the buy icon, and that links to the buy factory, which is right here, that little dude right here. Because this is a prefab, we actually cannot actually access these individual entities that are part of this larger prefab.
Yeah.
So if you want to actually edit these things, then you have to extract the prefab, and that would be under this button right here, extract all, and that would of course then extract the entire prefab, which means you can actually start editing it and start editing the components. Great, but you can easily make a few mistakes in here, and things will start breaking if you don't, if you move things, or if you move the areas around. So it's best not to play around with especially these big prefabs. So if we go back over to some of the other smaller prefabs, the single mech bay prefabs, we have, press escape to get out of it. You have, for example, let's see right here, this is the single, it's under the TC neutral mech bays, and this one's called single mech bay no spawn default factory. And you simply drag it over, and there you go. You can just create as many as you wish. You always want to create it approximately on the ground where it's flat. Doesn't clip through for very many places, as you can see, and away you go. Now, if you want to adjust anything into this, well, then you actually have to extract it. So one way to do that is clicking on the extract button, and zoinks, you have all the points, the pieces separated. If you hit escape, it deselects everything, and you can have, then you can see actually what are the individual components that make up this prefab. If we actually mouse over, you have the buy zone. And the buy zone, if you look over here, is targeted to the TC factory. Oops, sorry, the cat just walked over the keyboard. One sec. There we go. And yeah, so this is your TC factory. It's a neutral factory, and it's the buy zone is linked to the factory icon, factory entity. And the factory entity is right here in the ground. Kind of, you can't see it very well, but if you go underground, there it is. That's our little factory entity. If we double click on the factory entity here, the target, it becomes selected, it becomes pink flashing, and you have all the entity parameters for this actual factory entity. Right now, as you can see, the team name is blank, which means it can be either or. It's not preset to a certain faction. Tan is inner sphere, and black is is clan. So if you set it to tan, it'll be inner sphere, and black, you actually type in black, it becomes clan. When you have the factory class as default mech hanger, that means it will act as if it is a main default mech hanger. So like the main spawns. You can buy anything there, except for obviously aerospace and VTOLs. But as you can see, these are all the things that you can buy here. But even if you disable these individual ones right here, let's say artillery, you disable the spawning of the artillery, it will still be able to, you will still be able to actually purchase it because this is set. Default mech hanger overrides all the settings here in the buy options. So the first thing you do, if you want to control this, you remove that. And you re-enable whatever you want, or if you just want to make, let's say, a mech bay that's 65 tons, or like the Orions and such, typically what you do is get rid of the artillery, assault, heavy mechs, and then you have the hovercraft, lights, mediums, and as you can see, you can't actually select the different types of tanks. So if you would actually select the tank, then you would automatically become, you would basically allow people to spawn behemoths and Marses. If you disable it, then you can go up to Oros and Rommels and such. Pretty
I'm
straight.
seeing that there's some already some prefab factories that already restrain some types of assets.
Correct. Yes.
These work properly.
Yes and no. Which one are you looking at exactly? What's the name of it? Because I can tell you.
All let's say light, medium, heavy tank.
Yes and no. Reason why I waver on that is because you know how sometimes when you spawn on top of another asset that somebody just bought in front of you, right? Some maps have that issue. It's because the mech bay and the spawning of the actual location of the mech doesn't actually have a spawn helper attached to it. And you're probably wondering, what is a spawn helper? Spawn helper basically says this area is used until the mech moves out of the spawn area, and then the spawn queue releases, and the next person can actually spawn their next mech. So it avoids the problem of, mechs spawning on top of each other.
I remember such an event.
Yeah, and trust me, it's annoying.
3 or 4 mechs lagged on the ground.
Exactly, and it just becomes a mess, right? And I mean, it can be amusing and funny, but it's to be avoided if possible. So that depends on the type of entity that you're using, and the factory entity, and some of them are set up properly, and some of them are not set up properly. This one, as far as I remember, is. And actually, since this one's a little bit low, I think I'm going to actually... See, now I've made the mistake. So this is actually a good example. Because I extracted it, and now I say, oh, well, I want to actually make it higher because, look, it's already clipping through the ground. What do? Well, you can actually, let's see, move this one over here, Zoinks. And then you can select everything by going across the whole screen like this. And you have all items selected, which works perfectly when you have an empty map. But if you have a whole bunch of other things in the map, you start selecting things all by mistake. For example, if you do this, and you have suddenly, these things right here are selected. What you can do is hold down the Control key and then make another box with the left mouse button and, Alt key, Alt key, and unselect those things. And you can still have the original selection here. So that allows you to have some kind of control. Or you simply do individually, one by one. You hold down the Alt key, and you can see that goes to the minus, and you can go individually and deselect everything that you're doing. Anyway, so what you do there, select everything, and then we move everything together up a little bit, and there we go, fixed. Because if you don't select everything, and if you forget to move certain things, well, suddenly your spawn location becomes in the ground. So the next time somebody actually spawns a mech there, well, the mech might be partially buried in the ground, which obviously is to be avoided. So you have to be careful about when you're moving things, and especially entities that have multiple things like brushes, entities, and area spaces, and buy zones and such. All that has to be moved together as best as possible. And again, this is where making backups and lots of copies is always a good thing. Speaking of which, might as well do that right now.
I can't remember what I did to get to that little screen where I'm where I'm looking at what you can buy for the spawn. Where did I put it?
Ah, yes. So what you have to do is, have you extracted your prefab?
Yes.
Okay. So then you're going to have to find the icon either visually, or I'll show you another way to find it. If you can't find it, or you can't select it because it's under something else and it's difficult to see, there's different ways to actually get around. And I'll show you multiple ways to do this. One is through the roll-up bar, and if you click further through it, you can hide by categories. And this is a very useful tool. If you want to hide by brushes, Zoinks, you have now no longer any brushes. Brushes are the simplest physical objects in the game. Brushes cannot be moved. They're static entities. They're static objects, not entities, in the map. And as you can see now, if I hold down the space bar, I can eventually find the exact location of the factory entity and left click it, and there we go, I have it selected. And then if you click on the roll-up bar, you go back to the objects, you have all the information and settings for this object. And that's where you can get back into it. And if you want to then turn back on your brushes or unhide them, away you go. Another way to find it is by pressing Control T. Control T brings up the object selector and filter and finder. And as you can see, you don't have that many objects yet, obviously, because it's a new map, but soon this will be hundreds, if not thousands, of objects here. You can search for factory, and then it'll show you your factories. And this is the actual factory, and you can double click on it, and it'll bring it directly to it. And as you can see, the factory area is attached to the factory itself. Actually, you can see that right here. If you click on the object information, you can see that it's connected. The target is TC Factory, and if you double click on it, it'll actually go to that factory icon. So those are the multiple ways of actually getting to it. And of course, then you can filter if you really want to. You can reduce the amount of things that you can see right here. You can set like multiple objects. And most importantly, you have to be very careful about this. If you set something by mistake to frozen or hidden, you will not see it here. You will not be able to click on it if it's frozen. And you'll be very frustrated figuring out, why can't I click on this object? It's because most likely it's frozen. And if you can't find it anywhere, it's because it's most likely hidden. You can then unhide the object. Where is that now? Geez, I've even forgotten now. And as you can see, there's nothing hidden, but in any case, oh, that's right. You can, here, that's right. You go to the hidden objects and then you click on unhide, or you go to the frozen objects and you click on unfreeze. Sometimes by mistake, you click on the wrong thing and suddenly the object is frozen or hidden. There might be a hotkey for this, I just don't remember, but that can happen. And if you ever, are wondering why you can't get to something, check here. It's always a good thing to see. And if you see anything that's hidden or frozen, then you just unhide them or unfreeze them. That can be a lifeline. Okay, so we have our factory object, and it is set in this case to neutral. You can enable disable repairs. So that means, if you want to have a repair area, or if you want them to repair, you can turn that on and off. Obviously, some maps have it enabled and some maps don't. Some maps have dedicated repair areas. But again, this will only then allow you to repair what you can buy here. So that gives you this option, while a repair bay has no such limitations. So a repair bay will repair anything, including ASF if it can get its nose in there, heavy VTOL or whatever. As long as it get its nose into the actual repair area, the vehicle trigger area, then it will be able to repair. In this case, it can only repair what it can buy. So that's something that's definitely useful.